Hello again and welcome. Thank you for joining us at our seminar on God's plan for end-time wellness centers. I'd like to begin with prayer and invite God's presence. Would you bow your heads with me, please? Father in heaven, thank you for your guidance and the inspired counsel that you've given us, plus the wisdom of experience and in understanding the challenges as well as the joys of working for you in your vineyard as medical missionaries, especially in wellness centers. And we pray, Lord, that you'll bless our conversation today. Help us to deepen and strengthen our understanding. In Jesus' name, amen. I want to point out to you that there is a most helpful book now available. It's the most helpful book I've ever read, one of the most practical books I've ever read. It is the compilation of Spirit of Prophecy quotes concerning the keys to starting and managing a wellness center or sanitarium. And while I was a young man, I read this book, and as I was hoping to start a blueprint system of education and health and wellness, I spent some time reading this book, and it really changed my life. It really helped me to be able to prioritize between the things that are important and perhaps what is not so important in terms of purchasing property or organizing the wellness center or managing it and its finances and all the rest. It was originally compiled by a man named Jim Henson, who may or may not still be alive. He was in Florida when he did this work, and he happened to come by where I was, and I got a copy of the book, and I didn't realize the treasure I had. It was a gold mine and a wealth of information that was most helpful, and it's all from the inspired counsel. So I'd like to encourage you to get it. It's entitled God's Plan for End-Time Wellness Centers. I've added to it, and I've edited it and prepared it for publication. So in a way, it's a joint effort, and it is available as an ebook, and you can get it from the ebook sources on Amazon and other places. So by all means, it's not expensive, but it is well worth it, and you'll find it to be a very useful tool in your quest to do and understand God's will. Now I'd like to look at the methods that we use in wellness centers. This is from 7th volume of the Testimonies, page 78. In the night season, I was given a view of a sanitarium in the country. The institution was not large, but it was complete. It was surrounded by beautiful trees, shrubbery, beyond which there were orchards and groves. Connected with the place were gardens in which the lady patients, when they chose, could cultivate flowers of every description, each patient selecting a special plot for which to care. Outdoor exercise in these gardens was prescribed as a part of the regular treatment. I don't know about the men patients. What happened to them? Maybe they were doing other types of work around the place. But the principle here is that exercise in productive labor is the best, or one of the best ways of recovering health. And at our place in Victoria, Australia, we engaged the guests in the garden at least 1 or 2 days while they're there, depending on how long their stay. In this case, to choose a garden or a section of the garden and use it for exercise, it takes longer time if you're going to do that, and the guests nowadays typically don't stay more than a few days. So back then, it might have been longer stays, and therefore there would have been more opportunity to select the special plot, to work and to care for. So I'm not exactly sure how we would apply this today, other than to simply say that we engage them in our work, so they can go and work with whatever we're doing in the garden at that time. Or they can take a pair of clippers and go and prune some bushes or some flower plants or whatever needs to be done. So that's how we would apply that today, I think. Seventh volume of the Testimonies 103. Not 1/4 of the work has been done in opening the Scriptures to the sick that might have been done, and that would have been done if our sanitariums, or in our sanitariums, if the workers had themselves received thorough instruction on religious lines. So the wellness center needs to be also educating its own staff so that the staff are becoming more and more familiar with the Bible and with the principles of present truth and how to connect with the patients or the clients or the guests and instructing them when they're interested in religious lines. We always provide some kind of thought for the day in a very secular environment, or morning worship as it would be called in a more religious environment. So we provide them with a little bit of a foundation so that they can ask questions, and from there we can continue with opening the Scriptures to them. This is from Selected Messages, Volume 2, page 451. Drugs never cure disease. They only change the form and location. Nature alone is the effectual restorer, and how much better could she perform her task if left to herself? So our methods in the Wellness Center are not to include the use of drugs. Now, there are times when people come to us and they're already on drugs. You know, you can't just remove them off of those drugs cold turkey. So you have to work with them, and for instance, if they're on diabetic or diabetes medication, when they get on a plant-based diet and a low-fat diet and a exercise program, it very quickly means that you have to titrate their drug use down so that they don't go into a diabetic shock. That's just one example. There are other drugs that also would take some time to remove so that the guest doesn't have a crisis, a medical crisis, while he's on your campus. Another statement on drugs, Counsels on Health, page 261. Drug medication, as it is generally practiced, is a curse. Educate away from drugs. Yeah, and the thing is, we're to educate in lifestyle. And even if we use herbal remedies, which don't have the same side effects that regular drugs have, we still can't treat them as if they are the solution to the problem. The solution to the problem is predominantly lifestyle when it comes to lifestyle diseases. Now, of course, there are other types of infectious diseases. There are accidents and other things, and there's a need for drug intervention in emergency situations, and that gives the body a chance then to stave off death, while at the same time you can then take them into remedial care with natural means. But the thing is, God's people, God has given His Seventh-day Adventist people a mission. And that mission involves medical missionary work in a way that is not commonly practiced in the world today. And the need is for doctors and nurses to catch that vision and become part of the medical missionary teams that God needs to work the cities from the outpost centers. I'll carry on with the statement. Speaking of drugs, educate away from drugs, use them less and less, and depend upon more hygienic agencies. Then nature will respond to God's physicians: pure air, pure water, proper exercise, a clear conscience. Isn't it interesting to think about that? Because really, a lot of our guests come to our programs with a very cloudy conscience. They're often ridden with guilt. They're ridden with anxiety and depression, and that often is connected to things that they've done that they know are wrong, and habits they've formed or addictions they've formed that they know they need to break from. And so they have a lot of guilt, and to relieve that guilt is so, so wonderful. And that's why we're there. Those who persist in the use of tea, coffee, and flesh meats will feel the need of drugs. Did you get that? Drugs and flesh meats go together along with tea and coffee. But many might recover without one grain of medicine if they would obey the laws of health. Drugs need seldom be used. Notice that she uses the word seldom. She didn't say never. And there is need in some cases for the use of drugs. But they should seldom be used, and the emphasis should always be away from the use of drugs. Letter 6A, 1890. Many might recover without one grain of medicine if they would live out the laws of health. Drugs need seldom be used. We've kind of read that partly already. It will require earnest, this is what it takes to get to this point with your guests. It will require earnest, patient, protracted effort to establish the work and to carry it forward upon hygienic principles. So it takes the patient a while to pick up on it, but it also requires effort to create places where this can be done and to find the staffing that have the right philosophy. Reading on. But let fervent prayer and faith be combined with your efforts, and you will succeed. And by this work, you will be teaching the patients and others also how to take care of themselves when sick without resorting to the use of drugs. So that's essentially a carry-on, a further light from that same statement. 9th volume of Testimonies, 168. It is the Lord's purpose that His method of healing without drugs shall be brought into prominence in every large city through our medical institutions, which would no doubt include both the medical work in the city as well as the medical work in the outpost. Medical ministry, 224. Ill health in a variety of forms, if effect could be traced to the cause, would reveal the sure result of flesh eating. The disuse of meats with healthful dishes nicely prepared to take the place of flesh meats would place a large number of the sick and suffering ones in a fair way of recovering their health without the use of drugs. But if the physician encourages a meat-eating diet to his invalid patients, then he would make a necessity for the use of drugs. So it's obvious that the things you eat and the way you live has a lot to do with whether or not you can actually break free of the use of drugs. And I hear a lot of Seventh-day Adventists even who defend the use of meat, whether chicken or fish or even in some cases even red meat. They defend it as if somehow it is an imposition on them to give it up. But God's instruction is clear. If you want to have good health, you have to give up those flesh foods and any animal products, at least in this day and age. Manuscript 105, 1898. Drug medication should never have been introduced into our institutions. Ooh. Drug medication should never have been introduced into our institutions. There's an emphatic never. There was no need of this being so. And for this very reason, the Lord would have us establish an institution where He can come in. In other words, God is not in those other institutions, and where His grace and power can be revealed. Wow, that's quite a statement. This is from Manuscript 105, page 1898. A simple diet and the entire absence of drugs, leaving nature free to recuperate the wasted energies of the body, would make our sanitariums more effectual in restoring the sick to health. Wow, another powerful statement that we learn. And now we have one from second volume of the Testimonies, page 529, a walk, even in winter, would be more beneficial to the health than all the medicine the doctors may prescribe. I'm a great believer in exercise. In fact, my wife and I use our vacations and our holidays to hike. We find places where we can go in the mountains, and we hike up and hike down and hike around the lakes and other things. We like to hike. And it is, to me, exercise is perhaps one of the best ways to improve circulation. And optimum health is really dependent on optimum circulation. Ellen White puts it this way: perfect health depends on perfect circulation. So if you're going to have your health guests come to your wellness retreat, your wellness center, and you want to help them restore their health, you have to get them out and do a lot of exercise. It's not optional. You can't just have them sitting around the lounge room or the parlor or whatever term you use and not getting exercise. They need exercise in the open air, in the sunshine, in the fresh air, so that they can get their circulation going and cleanse and detox the body by the fresh air that's involved. There's other ways to detox as well, but this is one of the most important. So let's remember to be sure and give our guests lots of exercise. Counsels on Health, page 456. Many are unwilling to put forth the needed effort to obtain a knowledge of the laws of life and the simple means to be employed for the restoration of health. They do not place themselves in right relation to life. Did you get that? They don't place themselves in the right relation to life. In other words, they are working against healthful life, long life, life that's not debilitated by disease or some other issue. When sickness is the result of their transgression of natural law, they do not seek to correct their errors and then ask the blessing of God, but they resort to the physicians, as if the physicians can heal them. If they would recover health, they give to drugs and doctors all the honor, rather than God, of course. The point is that God's natural remedies bring glory to God. Drugs, pharmacology, all the big system, the medical system that exists today, really just brings glory to man. And it really doesn't solve the problem. And in fact, it's fake glory when you think about it. There are simple herbs and roots that every family may use for themselves and need not call a physician any sooner than they would call a lawyer. Isn't that interesting? That's second volume, Selected Messages, page 279. I do not think that I can give you any definite line of medicines compounded and dealt out by doctors that are perfectly harmless. And yet it would not be wisdom to engage in controversy over this subject. Oh, so we're not to get into controversy over this, but we are to work in such a way as to make this prominent, to help people understand that natural, integrative, if at best, natural medicine is the best. And if you have an integrative doctor who understands how to take people away from the drug concept to natural remedies, you have a system that can help people understand this better. But look, we must be careful even with herbal concoctions. There are even contradictions or contraindications, I should say, for some of them. But they're nowhere near as bad as drugs that are manufactured in the pharmaceutical companies. Spiritual Gifts, Volume 4, page 139 and 40. Every poisonous preparation in the vegetable and mineral kingdoms given into the system will leave its wretched influence affecting the liver and lungs and deranging the system generally. Now, isn't that interesting? She talks about the mineral kingdoms and the vegetable kingdoms. You know, many of the drugs that we have today are synthesized from minerals and natural sources. And so it's It's important that we understand that it loses, when you do that, you lose some of the qualities of the vegetable kingdom and the mineral kingdom that are there to offset the side effects of ingesting the herbal remedies, for instance. But, you know, there's those who see this differently, and I'm not here to enter into controversy with anyone. Just taking what the Spirit of prophecy, what the Lord has said through the Spirit of prophecy, and applying it to our situation. And I think that's what we have to do. Our work is a work of significance in the eyes of heaven. And if we follow God's instructions, we will have success. Here's another one from Spiritual Gifts, Volume 4. Again, from page 139. God's servants should not administer medicines which they know will leave behind injurious effects on the system, even if they do relieve present suffering. Well, we're talking here about a chronic situation. You know, emergency situations are different. The emergency room of a hospital has to deal with problems that are crises, and some people would die if they did not have some kind of medicine to keep them alive for the time being until they can get themselves sorted out. That should be the ultimate principle, that they then go to natural remedies to heal and detox after they have been to the emergency room, for instance. Or after they've been through surgery. Sometimes surgery is required. That would also involve some level of drug use to get them through it. And then once you've saved the life, then you can, of course, educate according to lifestyle. Letter 26, 1889. In their practice, the physicians should seek more and more to lessen the use of drugs instead of increasing it. When Dr. A came to the health retreat, she laid aside her knowledge and practice of hygiene and administered the little homeopathic doses for almost every ailment. This was against the light God had given. Thus, our people who had been taught to avoid drugs in almost every form were receiving a different education. This is the only statement where Ellen White refers to homeopathic. Homeopathic doctors, if we call them that, I guess, are around. They use their own concoctions of medicines that they give to their patients. But again, it's the same principle. The underlying principle is that we are to educate in lifestyle. And there may be some way that a homeopathic sort of natural treatment or pill can do some good on a short-term basis to get through a crisis once again. But ultimately, we must continue to teach and educate on the lines of lifestyle, diet, exercise, and all the other 8 natural remedies. Second volume, Selected Messages. Physicians, by administering their drug poisons, have done very much to increase the depreciation of the race, physically, mentally, and morally. So instead of improving the human race, it has depreciated it. Review and Herald, August 11, 1904. Let there be facilities for the giving of rational treatment, so that there will be no necessity for the use of drugs. What is a rational treatment? Well, obviously it's not drugs. Rational treatments are the things that we do to recover our health through diet, exercise, and therapies like hydrotherapy and other lifestyle-related activities that bring back the health. Counsels on Health, page 470. In all our medical institutions, patients should be systematically and carefully instructed how to prevent disease by a wise course of action through lectures and the consistent practice of the principles of healthful living on the part of the consecrated physicians and nurses, the blinded understanding of many will be opened, and truths never before thought of will be fastened on the mind. So actually, when our guests come to our wellness retreats, we're going to surprise them with information they've never thought of. We're going to give them evidence and evidence-based instructions to recover their health, and they will have never thought of these things, and it will even surprise them. And you'll hear them sometimes say, "Oh, now I understand. Oh, that's why." You know, and this is, of course, beneficial to everybody in the room, like when there's a lecture on and it's explained exactly what happens in the body. Anyway, we are to give lectures. And as it says here, give lectures and the consistent practice of the principles of healthful living. That means that we all have to engage in the practices of healthful living. Now, again, from page 469 of Counsels on Health, when the light came that we should begin sanitarium work, the reasons were plainly given. There were many who needed to be educated in regard to healthful living. As the work developed, we were instructed that suitable places were to be provided to which we could bring the sick and suffering who knew nothing of our people and scarcely anything of the Bible. And today that's even more true. Most guests that come to our programs in Australia, for instance, know very little of the Bible, if they've ever even opened a Bible. In fact, we had one gentleman that came to our program, and he was very impressed with the things we were sharing with him. He was also impressed with his need to understand God a little bit at least. And for the first time in his life, he opened the Bible and read from it while he was at our health retreat, our wellness center. I tell you, that was inspiring to watch this man try to find the verse. And once he found the verse, then he would read it, you know, and he really, it was very inspiring indeed. Okay, so then I'll read on. It says, they scarcely know anything of the Bible, and there, at the wellness retreat, teach them how to regain health by rational methods of treatment without having recourse to poisonous drugs, and at the same time surround them with the uplifting spiritual influences. As a part of the treatment, lectures were to be given on right habits of eating and drinking and dressing. Instruction was to be given regarding the choice and the preparation of food, showing that food may be prepared so as to be wholesome and nourishing and at the same time appetizing and palatable. Appetizing and palatable sometimes doesn't naturally go hand in hand with wholesome and nourishing. You know, you've got to have a person that understands how to make food look and taste good. And I have experienced some variety of this sort of thing, some variation in this, and it's been a challenge to help our teams prepare the kind of material, the kind of food that is palatable and appetizing, as well as wholesome and nourishing. Counsels on Health, page 452. In all our health institutions, it should be made a special feature of the work to give instruction in regard to the laws of health. The principles of health reform should be carefully and thoroughly set before all, both patients and helpers. Did you hear that? All, both patients and helpers. This work requires moral courage. For while many will profit by such efforts, others will be offended. You can't let those who are offended by your efforts, guide your course of action. That's why it requires moral courage. Also, I want you to notice the emphasis here. There's the methods that we use that we give them exercise in the open air and in the garden. often in the garden, but not necessarily always in the garden. But we also give them lectures. We give them training in cooking food or cooking classes. We demonstrate how to make the food, and we show them as they come to the dining room what the food should look like and how to make it nourishing and wholesome as well as appetizing and what was the other word? Anyway, all these things are methods that we use to educate people in the ways of proper and healthful living. Sometimes there's objections. If you sit around the table and you talk to the guests as you eat lunch or breakfast or whatever, sometimes they'll raise questions. Or they might even challenge you and saying, oh, well, You have to know how to respond in a godly way that will help them deepen their understanding of the principles of health. Medical Ministry 221, teach the people that it is better to know how to keep well than how to cure disease. Yeah, that's right. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And that's the principle that we are to teach in our wellness centers. Again, second volume of Selected Messages, page 281. Nature's simple remedies will aid in recovery without leaving the deadly after effects so often felt by those who use poisonous drugs. They destroy the power of the patient to help himself. This power the patients are to be taught to exercise by learning to eat simple, healthful foods. By refusing to overload the stomach with a variety of foods at one meal. Oh, okay, so we're to talk to our clients about not so much variety, not so many complex recipes. And by the way, simple things, prepared simply, take a lot less work. And busy people don't have a lot of time to cook their own food from scratch. So if you plan, you have to teach them how to plan so that when they go home, they can implement this in their own kitchen. So they have to plan how to prepare their meals ahead of time. For instance, if you're going to cook up some potatoes, you can put them in the oven for a couple of hours while you're getting ready for the day, for instance, or maybe even just an hour, while you're getting ready for the day, and have the potatoes ready for the time when you get home for lunch. And, turn it off as you go out the door, and when you come home for lunch, or when you take them in a container to work, and then eat them there at your work. So there's ways to do it. There's ways to think about it and strategize and plan, and you need to teach them how to do that. Another thing that's important to teach them is how to read labels. When they go to the grocery store, it's important that they understand how to read labels, because many things have a lot of toxic things in them, a lot of toxic ingredients that they need to avoid. Excitotoxins, for instance, and heavy spices and other harmful substances, monosodium glutamate. Those things are deadly, and you have to be very educational in explaining to them how to read labels and what those labels mean and what they don't mean. The things that are obscured, some of the language on labels obscures what's really in it, and so you have to educate them as to what that is. And if they don't know what a word means that's on a label, they can always go to the web on their smartphone and look it up, and they'll find it there, and at least they'll have some idea. The more complex the words are on an ingredient list, the more difficult they are to understand, the more likely that is a substance that is going to be harmful to their system. Eating foods in the natural way, as close to as grown, is the best way. And that's something we can teach them. So they destroy the power, I'm reading on, they destroy the power of the patient to help himself. And this power the patients are to be taught to exercise by learning to eat simple, healthy foods by refusing to overload the stomach with a variety of foods at one meal. We read that. All these things should come into the education of the sick. So your wellness center should be a very practical place where people can gain a lot of useful information. Counsels on Health, page 258. They make the great changes necessary for the adoption of correct habits. They must have time to consider the matter and learn the right way. So you can't just have them come in for a day, give them everything they need to know, and then send them home and expect them to follow up. It's not going to happen. It even is hard to happen when there's 5 days or when there are 12 days sometimes. It's actually around 17 or 18 days, 19 days perhaps, where habits begin to change and you begin to form new practices in a more consistent way. So you really have to, for shorter periods of time, you really have to be deliberative and specific and clear in explaining to them how to manage a healthy lifestyle. Ministry of Healing 227. It is labor lost to teach people to look to God as the healer of their infirmities unless they are taught also to lay aside unhealthful practices. Letter 63, 1905. The sick have their lesson to learn. They must be denied those preparations of food that would retard or prevent their recovery of health. They must learn the science of self-denial, eating simple food prepared in a simple way. They should live much in the sunlight, which should find its way to every room of the building. Lectures on health topics should be given. This is talking about the methods we use in our health retreat. These lectures will open the blinded understanding, and truths never before thought of will be fastened on the mind. We mentioned that one before. Manuscript 165, the work of advocating the principles of health reform is not to be a haphazard work. It is deliberative and it is instructive. It is a work which is deep and broad and high and essential work, the credentials of which are its practical workings. Because we are health reformers, we are not to make a raid on the people's habits and practices. What is a raid? Sounds like a SWAT team, you know. We're not to make a raid on the way people live. In other words, we're not to criticize and condemn and make these kind of comments that make them feel like they're being raided, you know. But as we educate, through the process of education, we essentially attack their practices, their common practices. And it has to be done with sensitivity, and at the same time has to be done in a positive way so that they don't feel as if they are condemned. And I think that would make a big difference in some cases. And by the way, I'll read on. It says, we are not to make a raid upon the habits and practices of the people. This is striking too directly at the gods they worship. Instead, we are to offer them something better, and that's the watchword of education, something better. Why have we established health reform institutions? That we may give people a practical demonstration of the principles we advocate. They see it in our lives, and they see it on the table and in the course that they take while they're with us. So it's very important, though, that we are careful not to make a raid on them. That's a strange use of words that Ellen White uses there, and it's the only time that I've found where she uses it that way. And the idea of attacking people's lifestyle, whether it's in the church, when you're giving a health lecture in the community, or whether it is in the wellness center, it all has to be done with sensitivity and care and kindness. Testimonies for the Church, Volume 5, 443. There are many ways of practicing the healing arts, but there is only one way that heaven approves. God's remedies are the simple agencies of nature that will not tax or debilitate the system through their powerful properties. And of course,
pure air and water, cleanliness and proper diet, purity of life, and a firm trust in God are remedies for the want of which thousands are dying. Yet these remedies are going out of date because their skillful use requires work that the people do not appreciate or that they don't want to do. So that's why we have to teach them how. We'll mention fresh air. Fresh air will prove more beneficial to the sick, or rather to sick persons, than medicine, and is far more essential to them than their food. Yeah, you can't live very long without air. They will do better and will recover sooner when deprived of food than when deprived of fresh air. So that's why our institutions, our wellness centers are to be built outside of the cities, out of the miasma of pollution and exhaust fumes and everything else that you get in the cities. And then out in the fresh air where they can exercise and detox, really, in that fresh air and in the sunshine. That, by the way, is from Counsels on Health, page 55. And from 7th volume of the Testimonies, page 78, encourage the patients to be much in the open air. Devise plans to keep them out of doors. Devise plans to keep them out of doors. Did you hear that? In other words, you have to be strategic about this. You know, because they don't want to go out, especially if it's cold or it's raining. They don't want to go out in the out of doors. But that's when you have to especially have a strategy and devise a plan that will keep them out there. You know, you give them umbrellas, you say, come on, let's go for a walk together, you know, and we'll talk as we walk. You know, a lot of times a clinician, rather than sitting in the office and talking to the guest, can say, well, let's talk while we walk, you know. And so the clinician gets exercise as well as the guest. And they can talk and work through some of the things that are troubling the client. Locate sanitariums on extensive tracts of land, we read that before, where in the cultivation of the soil, patients can have opportunity for healthful outdoor exercise. You know, so you send them up to the garden, and then you get them in the soil, and they start to have fun out there, and they don't want to come back in. But anyway, it works. Such exercise combined with hygienic treatment will work miracles in restoring and invigorating the diseased body and refreshing the worn and weary mind. So there you go. Ministry of Healing 272. In order to have good blood, we must breathe well. Full, deep inspirations of air which fill the lungs with oxygen purify the blood. They impart to it a bright color and send it a life-giving current to every part of the body. That's typical or simple anatomy and physiology. A good respiration soothes the nerves. Now that's important. Have you ever thought about that? When you go out and have a few deep breaths, you calm yourself. That's become more prevalent in recent times. Good respiration soothes the nerves. It stimulates the appetite and renders digestion more perfect. So it helps with digestion, and it induces sound, refreshing sleep. So if our clients, our guests, are getting out and exercising a lot during the day, by nighttime they'll have much sweeter sleep and they'll be able to get their rest. You see, the 8 natural remedies are collaborative, one with the other. They work together. And so God has given them to us in such a way as that we will produce the health that we need by cooperating with Him in all of those remedies. Let's talk about sunlight for a minute. Ministry of Healing 246. There are thousands who can recover health if they will. The Lord does not want them to be sick. Well, that's good. Good news. Beloved, I wish above all things that thou mayest prosper and be in health. Okay? And then I'll read on. It says, He desires them to be well and happy, and they should make up their minds to be well. So being well is partly having to do with the mind. It's not just having to do with the physical body. You can actually help yourself by a positive attitude toward being well. Often invalids can resist disease simply by refusing to yield to ailments and settle down in a state of inactivity. Activity has become one of the key issues to optimum health, at least in the research. People who sit all the time, or a lot of the time, are more prone to health. They even call it, that they say, inactivity is the new smoking. This is a phrase that's now been vetted around a bit. And in other words, they're saying that sedentary lifestyle is essentially going to affect the body and its health in a similar way as smoking will. That's pretty serious, isn't it? Rising above their aches and pains, let them engage in useful employment suited to their strength. By such employment and the free use of air and sunlight, many an emaciated invalid might recover health and strength. Okay, so sunlight and fresh air and exercise, they all go together. Exercise and the free and abundant use of the air and sunlight, blessings which heaven has freely bestowed upon all, would give life and strength to the emaciated invalid. Second volume of Testimonies, page 530. Temperance. Ministry of Healing 308. We teach temperance. We teach abstemiousness as the word that's often used. Abstemiousness in diet is rewarded with mental and moral vigor. It also aids in the control of the passions. Temperance in all things aids in control of the passions. If you have a temper and you fly off the handle when something goes wrong, there's a temperance issue there. If you are struggling with a moral problem in your life, temperance brings or helps in the process of overcoming that. Overeating is especially harmful to those who are sluggish in temperament. If your metabolism is slow, as you get older, your metabolism gets slower. And so if you're older and your metabolism is slow, you need to eat less. You know, what others can eat, you can't eat, because it's only going to add weight, and it's going to add health problems, and it's going to add other things. It's going to affect your moral character as well. Overeating is especially harmful to those who are sluggish in temperament. These should eat sparingly and take plenty of physical exercise. There are men and women of excellent natural ability who do not accomplish half what they might if they would exercise self-control in the denial of appetite. That was, by the way, from Ministry of Healing 308. Now we have second volume of Selected Messages, page 281. Talks or lectures should be given showing how to preserve health, how to shun sickness, and how to rest when rest is needed. So these are the 8, or part of the 8 natural remedies, and it needs to be presented to our guests with scientific background. The lectures should be given showing the scientific evidence for what inspiration has actually given us. And I think that's very, very important. Testimonies for the Church, page 530, and I don't know which volume, but anyway, it's brisk yet not violent exercise in the open air with cheerfulness of spirits will promote the circulation, giving a healthful glow to the skin and sending the blood, vitalized by the pure air, to the extremities. The diseased stomach will find relief by exercise. So again, we have lots of discussion here about exercise. There's also this very interesting statement about exercise in the garden. Once again, third volume of the Testimonies, page 78. Those who are feeble and indolent should not yield to their inclination to be inactive, thus depriving themselves of air and sunlight, but should practice exercising out of doors in walking or in working in the garden. I don't know about you, but I love my garden. I find great peace in my garden. When I want to settle my mind on something, I can go in the garden and pull weeds or work with the plants, and it helps me solve the problem, actually. And I begin to think about it as I work. And as I do, the Lord can impress me. I can pray and I can ask God to help me. And He gives me sometimes my best insights into how to solve my problems at work or at our health retreats or whatever while I'm working in the garden. There's nothing like it. And I could talk to you a lot about my garden, but I don't think we have time. Third volume of the Testimonies, page 78. Walking in all cases where it is possible is the best remedy for diseased bodies. Walking is the best exercise. There is no exercise that can take the place of walking. And by the circulation of the blood, and by it, the circulation of the blood is greatly improved. So in other words, we read earlier an interesting statement that said a walk even in winter would be more beneficial to the health than all the medicine the doctors can prescribe. So in other words, walking is one of the key principles of exercise in a wellness center. So get your clients, your guests out walking on a daily basis, probably even several times a day would be beneficial to them. Ministry of Healing, page 240. Exercise aids the dyspeptic. The dyspeptic, that's a distress of the digestion, by giving the digestive organs a healthy tone. To engage in severe study or violent physical exercise immediately after eating hinders the work of digestion. But a short walk after a meal with the head erect and the shoulders back is a great benefit. Head erect, shoulders back, and a nice walk around, a gentle walk around the place. Ministry of Healing 240. Those whose habits are sedentary should, when the weather will permit, exercise in the open air every day, summer or winter. Walking is preferable to riding or driving, for it brings more of the muscles into exercise. The lungs are forced into healthy action, since it is impossible to walk briskly without inflating them. There you go. We've read some things on these things already. I don't want to repeat myself too much. There's many, many statements on many of these topics as we have already read. Here's one that's from 7th volume of the Testimonies, page 95, about who we are to receive into our health retreats, our wellness retreats and centers. Receive into our sanitariums only those who desire to conform to right principles, those who will accept the foods that we can conscientiously place before them. And should we allow patients to have intoxicating liquor in their rooms, or should we serve them with meat, we could not give them the help they should receive in coming to our sanitariums. We must let it be known that from principle, we exclude such articles from our sanitariums and our hygienic restaurants. The hygienic restaurant is what would be considered part of the city center of influence. So we don't have alcohol, we don't have meat, we don't use those things that are harmful in those places. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 282. The patients are to be provided with an abundance of wholesome, palatable food, prepared and served in so appetizing a way that they will have no temptation to desire flesh meat. Oh, the food needs to be so good that they don't crave anything that they've been used to, along the lines of flesh food and other animal products. The meals may be made the means of an education in health reform. Care is to be shown in regard to the combinations of food given to the patients. Knowledge is in regard to proper food combinations is of great worth and is to be received as wisdom from God. So there's a lot of discussion about mixing fruits and vegetables, for instance. And we need to be careful that we don't give our clients, our guests, some distress, abdominal distress, because of the combinations of food that are put in the meal. I should add that I had an experience where one of our cooks put so much coconut oil into the food that it became overwhelming to the system, and I experienced it myself where I'd have breakfast, and by lunchtime I'm still burping up the effect of the coconut oil. And we had to address that issue in our wellness retreat and come back to a more appropriate recipe and use of that particular ingredient. Sometimes you have to experiment with ingredients, and sometimes the ingredients will surprise you or catch you by surprise. And I should point out that in this day and age, there are a lot of people with gluten sensitivities. And so we have to be very careful how we use gluten in our wellness centers because many of them have problems that don't appear to be related to gluten, but they are. And so we tend to shy away from using gluten products in our wellness center. There's danger of providing too limited a diet for people who have come directly from a diet so abundant as to encourage gluttony. The fare should be liberal, but at the same time it should be simple. I know that food can be prepared simply and yet be so palatable as to be enjoyed even by those who have been accustomed to a richer fare. So we have to have good chefs and cooks to do this. Well, we could go on. There's a lot more that can be said about these things, but we are virtually out of time today. And so I want to emphasize that our diet is to be very well organized around the principle of natural healing and natural diet. Now, there's also hydrotherapy that we use as one of our methodologies. We use massage. We use other elements that we can use to bring healing to specific areas of the body. And all of these things are important to us. And so God has given us wonderful counsel to use the methods that He has given us in our wellness centers. And I think it's very important that we think about these and strategize and plan them in so that it is well and effective with our guests.